Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Councillor Matthew Green, and I'm the Cabinet Member for Business Licensing and Planning, which includes our new Westminster Investment Service. I'm really pleased to actually be here at this hybrid event with real people in a real room, in a real hotel. And you've been able to look around. I saw the camera panning at the fantastic view that we have at the Hampshire Hotel here on Leicester Square. I'm really grateful to all of you joining me both in person and online this afternoon, as I realise there are a number of competing priorities, including a delegation of German impresarios who are looking to capitalise at Wembley. I'm delighted to be joined today by the Right Worshipful Lord Mayor of Westminster, Councillor Jonathan Glanz, who will open our event this afternoon by welcoming everyone and setting the scene by sharing his thoughts on Westminster at the heart of London and at the heart of the global economy. Lord Mayor, please.
Thank you, Matthew, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here today to bid you a very warm welcome on this flaming June afternoon to the launch of the Westminster Investment Service. And it is really something which I am very happy to be doing and welcoming everybody here to participate in our panel event, whether you're here in person or whether you're joining us at the hotel here online. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Edwardian Hotel Group for offering to host this panel today from this spectacular penthouse overlooking this wonderful view, as Matthew has said, looking across to the House of Parliament with London with a broody sky, but nevertheless in all its magnificence here this afternoon. And I'm delighted that Linda Plant, the Director of Strategic Relations here at the Edwardian Group, is able to be with us this afternoon. So thank you. One of the views that you will see from this window here is of the new Londoner Hotel, and this represents an outstanding example of investment in the West End here, and the Edwardian Group have made this extraordinary addition to Westminster right in the heart of the West End. We'll be hearing from Charles Oak at the Londoner as to what he's going to create there, because we're going to see something very new. We're going to see London's first super boutique hotel, and I'm really looking forward to the day when it will be open and hearing more about what it will offer by way of an additional facility and to add to the hotel offerings here in this world-class city. First of all, I'd like to share some thoughts with you about Westminster and why it really is truly the heart of London and of the global economy. We are uniquely placed. Not only is it the seat of government, the home of royalty, but it is also the UK's window on the world, and Westminster is a global meeting place. We have people here from all over the world. It is truly a cosmopolitan and world city with people from every nation and every background mixing here in this this extraordinary place where everybody can meet and get on. And it is in normal times, it's a destination where millions of visitors would come to London, both internationally and nationally from elsewhere within the UK. It has a unique set of attractions, neighbourhoods and national treasures which give it something which no other city can offer. This means that there will always be a very significant interplay between our local heritage and our contemporary international influence. And this, as I said, is represented by over 180 nationalities here, with hundreds of languages and different cultures represented here in Westminster. Such international influence is rooted in the cultural offer, and we have here world-class museums, theatres, galleries, and we have a huge creative industry here which produces not only film and television productions, but also supports the theatre and other performing arts. It really is an extraordinary combination of talent which we enjoy here based in Westminster. And we are also blessed with not only physical but also now excellent digital accessibility. In Westminster we have 120,000 businesses employing over 600,000 people, and we have some of the very best connectivity through fibre being throughout the city and available in nearly every building within the central area. One of Westminster's other great strengths, of course, is its diversity, and it is a vital element and part of what makes Westminster so special. And as we will be hearing more about during the panel session, many companies have chosen to come to London, from huge international companies to micro businesses, and there is room for everybody to find their best way of operating here in Westminster. Much has been written about the recent adoption of tech, and Westminster has been a leader in that field. We have a significant number of tech-based companies performing well as part of the knowledge economy. And we are also home to our highly ranked universities and institutes of higher education and other training. So I'm delighted that we have King's College represented on our panel today, and also that the University of Westminster is with us online, as they both provide excellent insight and support and are very much part of the new investment service. Companies here also have excellent access to London-based sources of UK international investment, and that is supporting new growth. So, in addition to that, we have the globally renowned retail, leisure and hospitality offering, which is second to none on a worldwide basis. And at the Council, we have been supporting that, both in respect of the economic reset, which is taking place as we come out of the COVID experience, but also we have been supporting a significant upgrade of civic space and the public realm, whether it's widening pavements, creating new pedestrian spaces, or creating new green areas to enhance the visitor experience to the West End and make it a pleasanter experience, both from the point of view of regular visitors and people working here, and from the point of view of those coming to experience the new experiential activities which we are now seeing spring up as part of the Westminster offering. And we are responding to the consumer changes which are taking place as a result of what has happened in the pandemic, and indeed was starting before that, but it was something that had just been recognised and supported by the Council in relation to the use of buildings in the West End. So the Westminster scene, which is intrinsic, it is the 8.5 square miles at the centre of London. It provides a unique opportunity, a dynamic pattern of economic and cultural activity, which is really unique in the world, and it gives a real opportunity to support, showcase and generate further economic growth. So I will pass you back now to Matthew, who will introduce the panel, and I will always be here to support Westminster as Lord Mayor and as a champion for our unique city, and to support the investment service as it grows throughout Westminster. Thank you.
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. And the Lord Mayor was being very modest there when he talked about the city's connectivity, because the improvements that we've seen to Westminster's connectivity over the past 5 or so years are down in no small part to the efforts played by Councillor Glanz to help achieve that. So again, I'd like to echo the Lord Mayor's thanks to the Edwardian Group today for hosting us. It's been an incredibly difficult 12 months for our hotels, and I'm pleased to see occupancy rates start to increase across Westminster as staycationers begin to travel to our city again to enjoy our theatres, our shops and our cultural offer. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the Londoner open. It's a fantastic demonstration of confidence in the future of Westminster as a tourism and business destination to see this kind of investment. And if you allow me to mention some of your competitors, to also see recent openings such as the Nobu Hotel and the Nomad, the latter being the group's first hotel outside of the US, as well as major new hotels under construction, such as the Peninsula, Raffles, and the Mandarin Oriental at Hanover Square. So you may ask, why, with this level of investment, at least in our hotel sector, do we need a Westminster investment service? Well, simply put, we at the City Council want to make Westminster the most business-friendly borough in London, offering investors the opportunity of not only millions of customers in consumer growth sectors, but also giving companies access to one of the world's most diverse and talented workforces. Let me briefly outline what the service entails. Firstly, it includes a concierge service. This means there is a single entry point for businesses to access support from the council. This new single entry point will provide navigational support to investors, as well as tailored account management, giving new businesses establishing in Westminster both a warm welcome and a soft landing. The concierge service will dovetail with the work of the business improvement districts, and I'm so pleased to see so many of the business improvement districts represented here at the Hampshire and also online. So this will dovetail with the work of the BIDS, our property sector and London partners, all of which are also front of house in terms of receiving requests from new and existing businesses requiring advice and support. We've also connected with Transport for London and the Cross River Partnership to ensure the widest possible support. So whether it's local business intelligence, early discussions on regulatory services such as planning and licensing, logistics, employment and training, business space or business introductions, we are here to support. Secondly, the new Westminster Investment Service will have a programme of reaching out to companies across the borough to better understand their sector and the business opportunities associated with that sector. This will help us shape and tailor our services and further build our business ecosystem, more of which we'll hear about during the panel session. This might be about the local supply chains, about creating local employment and training opportunities, or looking at market opportunities, especially those related to our City for All plan ambitions, such as green and smart city initiatives. Thirdly, we are developing a suite of new arrival stories and case studies of company success and investment already established in the borough. This in good company narrative will complement the work of the BIDS and offer more insight, introductions, and networking between businesses and sectors. I'm delighted that a number of our new arrivals have joined us online for this launch event. I'm particularly happy that two of our panellists, King's College and the Edwardian Group, have offered to support our new service in ambassadorial roles. Engaging with sector leaders and influencers is an important aspect of the Westminster Investment Service, and there are many opportunities for businesses to champion and help shape our offer to future investors. And while we're here to talk about the launch of the Westminster Investment Service, it would be remiss of me not to talk about the significant investment that is underway by the Council to open up new economic opportunity as our city reopens. Our ambitious plans for the Oxford Street district are well underway. Those who have visited in recent weeks will have seen streetscape changes designed to improve the look and feel of the area, as well as to provide additional greening and seating. The Council has also recently launched plans with the Crown Estate to deliver 2 pedestrian piazzas at Oxford Circus. In September, we will also be launching a new public space on the pedestrianised Strand as part of our Strand Aldwych project, with a major 3-week-long unique attraction to be announced very soon. Our animation and experiential programmes are opening up new spaces, such as bringing the Underbelly Festival to Cavendish Square or launching a major new visit attraction at Marble Arch. We're working with the bids and landowners to deliver our pop-up programme, which will see dozens of exciting new occupiers across the city this summer. We're also consulting with residents on how we can extend the alfresco dining experience that has been so successful and has brought continental cafe culture to the streets of Westminster. Who needs Paris? So you've heard enough from me. It's time to turn to the experts. We've chosen to launch our new service with a panel who really know the ins and outs of doing business in Westminster. They will share their knowledge and experience of the existing and new opportunities for businesses and economic growth in our city. And we want to hear from you as an audience about what will help shape future investment into Westminster. In particular, how we can continue to support our business base, strengthen our clusters, nurture our culture and heritage, engage with the tech of the future, and unlock new talent. So over to our panellists. First of all, let me introduce Charles Oak. As the hotel director for the fantastic new Londoner Hotel, and with a hospitality career spanning 3 decades, Charles is a veteran of Westminster hotels, starting his career at the Savoy, with stints at the Berkshire on Oxford Street, as well as here at the Hampshire, and 6 years as general manager of the Mayfair Hotel. Charles will share his expertise and knowledge of the hotel and hospitality market in Westminster and on why the Londoner is extremely well placed here in Leicester Square. Courtney Finger is editor of the Investment Monitor, a digital publication focused on foreign direct investment. Before joining the group, Courtney spent 15 years with the Financial Times, also covering inward investment. Courtney has been on assignment to over 80 countries and is well placed to help us figure out how Westminster fares in attracting businesses from those countries. All 80 of them, please. Professor Uta Stefan is Professor of Entrepreneurship at King's College here in Westminster, where she works internationally on the psychology and culture of entrepreneurship. Her research has gained significant awards and media coverage in the BBC, The Guardian, Bloomberg, Forbes, and Al Jazeera. Uta will share her perspective on entrepreneurship here in Westminster through the eyes of the business school at King's. We have Henry Horwood, who will start our panel session off with a short presentation. Henry leads the Bowhurst Research and Consultancy team. He is an expert on business finance and has worked on brief for clients including the British Business Bank, HM Treasury, BASE, and Innovate UK. And finally, we have Alan Simpson, who is currently acting CEO at London Partners. He joins our panel both as a partner and an expert on London's positioning for business and investment. Previously, Alan spent 6 years at Barclays Bank, where he led the bank's political strategy function and business finance team. He was chair of the SME committee of the Pan-European Wholesale Banking Group, AFME. So that is our panel. Ladies and gentlemen, if you could give them a round of applause, please. So now we move to the panel session, which will run for about 40 minutes and follow with questions and answers. You are able to ask questions virtually, and those will be passed to me here at the panel. So first of all, I'd like to start off by asking Henry to make a short presentation on the strengths of Westminster's high growth sectors. Henry, please.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. This afternoon, I'm going to talk to you about some research that we've been doing for Westminster City Council, looking at the high growth economy within Westminster. Now, I'm going to start by defining what we mean by high growth, and then I'll launch straight into the findings as quickly as possible. I'm going to show you a sample of what we've done that I think gives a flavour, but underlying this, there's a lot more research and a full report that sits with Westminster. So there are a variety of ways to grow as a startup or scale-up, and we are trying to track every single one of them. We track nearly 40,000 businesses now since we started in 2011 across the UK and across all sectors. We are looking for any company that is raising equity investment or venture debt in order to grow. We are looking at companies spinning out of universities. We are looking at companies attending accelerators. We're looking at companies even in their finances where we can just see that they are growing by at least 10% year on year in turnover and headcount. We are looking only at private companies, and typically a lot of these companies are startups, but they can also be more established businesses that are entering a phase of growth. So that creates this sort of 40,000 company universe, and then we've drilled down into the ones headquartered in Westminster for this research that we've done for the council. So we identify over 2,000 high growth businesses in Westminster, currently headquartered in Westminster. Nearly 1,500 of those have raised some amount of equity to grow. Now this includes a whole host of different kind of investment transactions, from a startup. If you started a business in Westminster tomorrow and you raised £50,000 from friends, family, and maybe an angel investor, that is included in this cohort, through to a massive sort of $200 million round into a growth stage company. Those are all included in that 1,500 companies in Westminster that have raised equity in order to grow. And then we're tracking about 36 spin-outs that are currently headquartered in the UK, in Westminster, out of a population of about 1,500 in the UK. Westminster's universities have created more startups, more spin-outs than that, but those are the ones that are currently headquartered in Westminster. I'll come on to it. I've got another slide on the breakdown of those spin-outs. And then finally, 130 of those over 2,000 companies in Westminster have received money from the government through innovation grants. So 130 of them have received grants in order to develop a new kind of product or service. In terms of the sectors that we see dominating Westminster for this kind of high growth company, you can see that software and financial services are dominating. That reflects a trend that we see across the UK. Those are sort of the specialities of the UK, if you like, and that gets reflected in the population in Westminster. Some of the ones that we start to see a bit higher up on this list for Westminster than we would across the rest of the UK are companies in sectors such as marketing services and e-commerce, and particularly given around Soho, the marketing services specialities. There are more detailed maps in the full report that we've done for Westminster breaking down those clusters, but it's nice to see those reflected in the data when sort of intuitively we know them to be strengths of Westminster. In terms of emerging sectors, so these are both classifications that our researchers have applied to these companies when we find them. The sort of established sectors are the ones you might expect and kind of reflect similar things to the SIC codes for anyone who's gone into the depths of business data. In terms of emerging sectors, these are either new trends or things like fintech, which actually represent the sort of coming together of two sectors. Again, fintech and AI topping this list. That reflects what we see across the UK. Again, these are two sectoral specialities for the whole of UK. And then you start to see things like ad tech and e-health, which are a bit higher up this list than we would see for the whole of the UK if we were presenting a similar picture. We've looked into it, and again, ad tech, you can start to see some of that being driven by clusters around Soho, and e-health to a smaller extent. It's a bit hard to determine actually from the data, but might be driven by some clustering around Harley Street and health services centered around there. In terms of the innovation grants over time, you can see a big spike. This is due to a spike in Innovate UK's activity over the past year. So starting during the pandemic, they gave out even more money, but a decent number of those grants going to companies in Westminster. And then finally, just ending a bit more on spin-outs, because sort of given everything that's happened over the past 18 months or so, the world's eye is very much on the commercialization of university research. And you can see here 185 spin-outs have been created by universities based in Westminster. A large number of those obviously end up elsewhere, and I think that's an interesting question to pose for the investment service overall, is what more can be done to retain those. They are very interesting and very sort of heterogeneous businesses in terms of their requirements, both for capital, real estate, and talent. So they have perhaps the strongest headwinds pushing them to different locations. Many of these, so of those 185, some of them do retain presences in Westminster, but this is to do with where their head office and the main benefit of their economic output is felt. That was very much a whistle-stop tour. I'm now blinding my fellow panelists with our bright yellow slide. There's a lot more research. I think I'll come on to some of it during the panel, but also I'm very happy to take questions over email if anyone's got any detailed questions to ask.
Thank you very much, Henry, and thank you for turning off that slide. Nobody wants their face illuminated in yellow. Henry gave a really interesting presentation on the level of entrepreneurship in Westminster. I think turning to Professor Stefan, it would be really interesting to know how you, as a professor of entrepreneurship in King's as well, is championing those entrepreneurs who are spinning out into Westminster, and perhaps tell us more of what we can do to keep those businesses in our city.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you very much for a nice introduction, and also Henry for the really nice compact overview. I think if you put it from a academic perspective, the ecosystem here is great, right? So there's actually a lot of good things to say. It's very clear that there are very strong clusters, very strong sectors, and there are great cultural institutions. There's great technology. There is great access to finance. And there are great universities which provide a lot of the human capital. And so I think no ecosystem is alike, and it grows over time, but there's so many good things. However, there's also some things which may make it a little bit easier for spin-outs especially to stay. And of course, being in the heart of a global city, the cost of property is one aspect. The other aspect is also that being in the heart of a global city means a bit more vulnerability to viruses that drive off social contact. However, there is an upside to this. On the one hand, we see that London businesses are more significantly negatively impacted, so they've been suffering more. Our research shows that in a global comparison. But the upside is they're also much more resilient. They have much stronger high growth expectations in the long term. And we know from past research in the financial crisis that these are a really good lead indicator for actual job growth, and not just job growth, but also for thriving, innovative, export-oriented businesses. So really the high growth businesses you want. So there's really much potential, and in a way the crisis also has given us an opportunity to rethink maybe and strengthen some of the aspects. So sustainability comes out as a trend that the entrepreneurs tell us is really top of mind, and that feeds into kind of med-tech, health tech, and and clean energy, all of these elements. And it seems that Westminster again is really well positioned to kind of leverage these aspects. And then, of course, the Westminster Investment Service, I think, is a really excellent idea, because ecosystems are complex. And so what does that mean for the individual entrepreneur? It can be really difficult to get your head around where to look. You have all of these great things, but how do you make a choice? And entrepreneurs we know are the most time-constrained individuals in any working population. So having a one-stop shop that allows to navigate this ecosystem, I think, is really something that entrepreneurs tell us all the time is really essential. And underpinning, I think, some of this optimism that we see in the entrepreneurs, especially in London, especially in Westminster, is, I think, to a large part, the human capital. And of course, that's where universities come in. And in a way, even though King's is a very old and established institution, the business school within King's is actually very much a startup. So we are a bit older than 2 years. So we kind of feel the high growth phase at the moment, because we've doubled in size. And we are really keen, together with our Entrepreneurship Institute, to really make King's an entrepreneurial university. And for us, that means educating individuals in very strong subject areas, and then feeding through every subject area an entrepreneurial mindset. So hopefully in the very near time you have even more global talent that you can draw on with an even stronger entrepreneurial mindset than we already have. And just to give you a flavor of the type of activities we're doing, so there's very much things going on in the classroom, but we're also taking students through Westminster, through London and its ecosystem to show actual entrepreneurs in the Venture Call, which actually now has turned into a mini global enterprise. So it's taking place in other countries, inspired by what the King's Entrepreneurship Institute has designed, including in Australia. There's just some ideas. We are also really keen to work together with businesses. We have dedicated student consultancy projects and so forth. So there's also an open call. If you're interested, approach us, and we're very happy. And we're really happy and proud to also be able to act as an ambassador for the investment service.
Thank you very much, Professor Stefan. So turning to Courtney now. Now, you just heard Uta say that we were great at least 6 times, maybe even more. How do we take this and put it into the wider global context of investment and get out the message worldwide that Westminster is an attractive destination for investment?
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for having me here. It's a great pleasure, and congratulations on the launch of this service. It's being launched at a time when it's probably one of the most challenging times in recent history, probably in decades, to do inward investment. So the work is cut out. There is a strong offer to promote, but it's really challenging time. That probably argues in favor of establishing such a service, though, and getting on the front end of things. So to place things in the global context that the Councillor mentioned, I'll just talk a little bit about the broad view, and then I'll touch on to perhaps how London, and more specifically Westminster, can capitalize on these trends and find its place in this global context. So there are a few macro trends I would point to that are impacting FDI at this moment in time. I mean, really, we can't talk about any global trend without the C word, COVID, and then a UK trend without the B word, Brexit. But I'm really not going to harp on about Brexit because we've all discussed so much about the implications of that one way or another. And COVID is really what is disrupting the global business environment at present. And what we've seen, apart from all the instant shocks and the drama of the pandemic, is really just that it has accelerated many pre-existing trends that we were already seeing, clearly disrupted supply chains, and just brought to the fore some changes that were already happening as companies started to try to shorten supply chains for many reasons, to save on energy costs, to be more green, also to reduce risk. That has become even more important than ever. So you've seen a lot of talk of reshoring, bringing production closer to home. And instead of perhaps having one big hub in Asia and one in Europe and so on, it's perhaps some smaller little spokes here and there. And that brings into a question of a kind of a tension of regionalization at the expense of globalization, that there's a lot sort of political element to that as well that we need to watch. Obviously, changes in working patterns and remote working. Again, I don't need to say too much about that because we all know that that's happening and that it has massive changes. But what it means for inward investment is talent mapping. And so, first of all, who counts talent? I think this is something really interesting, not talked a lot about. So if we're in the olden days of foreign direct investment, in the olden days being 2019, where I live and work is who counts me, as a talent, if it's deemed that I am a talent. But these days I just spent 6 months working remotely from Italy, where we have a place, and sometimes I'm here and occasionally somewhere else, and I'm not really in an office, I'm in my house, so who claims me? So this impacts where companies think about where they locate, because the big driver of investment is usually talent, and you want to go where the talent is, but where is the talent and where will they be located? So this is something that will impact every location as they seek investment. Now, there are winners and losers of that, of course. Talent is dispersing. This has interesting consequences for city center locations, and as mentioned, Westminster is probably the ultimate city center location, being the very center of a big major global city. A lot of smaller locations are trying to capitalize and sort of pull some activity, talent, and action and investment out of these city centers. So your challenge will be to try to keep it a little bit back in the center and keep value and keep people in the center. Automation, and this is related, of course, to some of the changing supply chains because it impacts where production is. That's less relevant for a place like Westminster, but also impacts remote working and where people are scattered, what jobs look like, and therefore where these jobs are located. And sustainability. Now, this has been a priority. Sustainability and ESG has been important to companies for a while. But in the era of building back better, it's now a top level priority, and therefore investment policies, investment promotion policies, and business support schemes need to have that front of mind and think, how can that fit into what you're trying to do? So all of that has meant that it's tough times for FDI, as I mentioned, a really challenging environment. I won't really go into the numbers, just to say that they're really depressing. All the graphs from last year were pretty much like this. A recovery is coming, so it's not all gloom and doom, but it will likely be a U-shaped recovery with FDI figures globally rebounding a small amount this year, and with the recovery really taking off, well, we hope taking off next year. Now, a bright spot for London and for Westminster is that some of the sectors that have performed the best throughout the pandemic in terms of creating foreign direct investment are innovative-led sectors. So they're healthcare, life sciences, biopharma, software, and IT. And that means that locations that are really strong in these sectors have been able to keep their investment flows a little bit steadier. And you know, Alan can speak much better to what's happened in terms of London and the UK and FDI, just to say that the UK's challenge is, of course, these dual disruptions of Brexit and companies getting to grips with that, and investors trying to decide what that meant and what the lay of the land would be. And just when projects started to stabilize after an initial shock in 2016, COVID came and created more uncertainty. So that is something that has to be addressed, obviously, when talking to investors, because they like to have certainty, is reassuring about what the future prospects will be. And I won't go on too much longer. I think I can address more in questions or any follow-up that you have. What I see it, just to recap, is just that the opportunity is in helping lead the recovery. I do believe that as the world tries to move into recovery, the major global cities have a role to play, and the key business locations and the heart and soul of these cities really need to show the way. And you will be leading the way into recovery by doing the ground level work to support entrepreneurs, to support scale-ups, to help businesses to grow, to create jobs, but also to send a message that business is back, and at the same time be open and welcoming and facilitative to global companies that want to find their home here. And that's probably would be the best outcome of a service like this.
Well, thank you, Courtney. We're more than happy to claim you here in Westminster, and also thank you for not showing us your depressing figures. Although I'm not sure I forgive them away for now. Yeah, I'm not sure I forgive you though for mentioning Brexit and COVID in the same sentence. Sorry. But I'm sure now that our next speaker, Charles, will cheer us up because he'll be talking about the fantastic new investment that we have in the Londoner, which is just next door to us, and he can talk to us about the confidence. The confidence that the sector has in Westminster, and how what more we can do to support the hospitality industry.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'm thrilled to be here in this beautiful room, which I believe is actually for hire. So if great rates are currently available. But I'm just thrilled to be here in this room full of people interacting and talking about Westminster. Westminster is very much in my blood. I went to the best hotel school in the world in Westminster, although the Swiss might say differently, but it was wonderful. And I've spent most of my working life in Westminster. Now I'm in a position where I'm leading this extraordinary new hotel, which came about 10 years ago through the vision of our chairman, Jasminder Singh, after being in London for 40 years as a private company, investing in London. And I think if there was any statement of commitment to why Westminster is such an incredible place to invest, £350 million, I think, says that. And we started this project 10 years ago. We opened on the 6th of September. Reservation lines are currently live. And we couldn't be more thrilled to be in this incredible borough. We believe it's the best possible place in London to launch one of the most dynamic, creative, innovative new properties in the hotel industry, breaking many rules about hospitality and service. And through the support of Westminster Council, a very forward-thinking group of people, we've been able to achieve a building, a project that's off the charts in terms of design and opportunity. And we hope and believe that being where we are, we have the best possible chance of success. We don't believe it's any different from 2019 when we were talking about launching this property. We've had a bit of a blip the last couple of years, but we are way over that now, and we are launching positively, energetically. We are launching with a wonderful team of people, recruited mostly locally. Up to 600 people we're about to take on. And the London is a true sort of phoenix rising from the COVID ashes. And we are that statement about investment in Westminster, and I'm unbelievably excited about it.
Thank you very much, Charles.
I hope that was positive enough for you.
Very positive. I hope everybody's inspired. In particular, I hope they're all inspired to go out and hire 600 Westminster residents. So finally, I'm going to turn to Alan from London and Partners. And London and Partners sells London to the world and encourages investment into the larger city as well as the more important city of Westminster. Alan, maybe you can just tell us a little bit more again about how we can position Westminster on the global stage.
Yeah, happy to. And it's worth saying that London and Partners deals with the gamut of London's sort of economy. So from inward investment of high growth companies from all around the world through to tourists arriving in Heathrow and Gatwick to come and enjoy centres like this. So we do see this across people's lives, really. And my observation would be this. Our research shows and our practical experience shows that if you go anywhere around the world, there are 3 boroughs in the world that people will be able to name. There's Manhattan, there's the City of London, and there's Westminster. Very few people in Shenzhen could name a borough in Paris. Very few people in New Mexico could name a borough in Toronto. But those 3, 2 of which are in London, are famous in their own right. And that makes selling Westminster possible as a destination. But it does occur to me that of those 3 boroughs, 2 of which are in London, there is something quite unique about Westminster, which is that it's a centre of government, it's a centre of culture, it's a centre of commerce, and it's a centre of investment capital. And that really matters, because to your point with that data, so many of the high growth sectors which are dominating the, maybe not GDP yet, but the ranks of high growth companies, are what we tend to think of as syncretic. They are sectors which are bringing 2 sectors together. So if you want to succeed in the high growth economy, you need to be a place which is able to provide, let's say, coding skill alongside design skill. You need to be able to provide financial services capability alongside, for instance, AI capability. You need to be able to bring these 2 things together, and that's how you succeed. It's by bringing sectors and skill sets together. So that's one thing that Westminster is pretty uniquely positioned to do. I think the second thing is this: culture drives investment. In the modern world, that's truer than ever, because high growth, for people leading high growth businesses, they don't actually want to just go to a boring financial centre anymore. They're driven by their ability to access and be part of a cool culture. So that's why we increasingly find that actually London's major competitive challenge is less perhaps New York, Paris, Berlin, and more Stockholm, Helsinki, Tel Aviv, because these new investors are looking for cool things. They want to be in a frontier location. And that's why if you stand in the Londoner, in that amazing rooftop bar, and you can see to your south, you can see the National Gallery. If you kind of peek west, you can see out towards the Royal Academy. If you peek east, you can see these fantastic, maybe more organic cultural things being set up in the east of London, in the southeast of London. That drives investment just as fundamentally as the raw numbers do. And if I could just very quickly touch on what we're seeing about the stability of FDI globally. My perspective on it is, given that we have had, sorry to put it in the same sentence again, Brexit and coronavirus in 1 year, I consider the FDI flow to be pretty remarkable in some ways. It's remarkable how resilient it's proved. London did particularly well. London had more inward investments, volume not value, than any other city in the world last year. But I think globally FDI was surprisingly stable. So at its worst, again, in terms of numbers of deals, in most of the world, in their worst month, they experienced FDI fall to about 20% of what it would normally be, and then it kind of recovered. And what that tells you is that people are continuing to invest in the future. That's what you're seeing there. People are saying, yes, it's pretty crap now, but in a year's time, it's better. And now, actually, we're seeing a flow of FDI, which is quite hard to keep up with. And I know that our partners in other cities are finding the same thing, but there appears to be something about the market's perspective on international trade and investment, which is more resilient than I think we sometimes think it is. So to summarise, look, the overall market is more resilient than we sometimes talk about it being. Westminster is pretty, I think, uniquely placed to benefit from that.
Okay, thank you very much, Alan. And if anybody mentions Brexit and COVID in the same sentence again, I'm going to reveal the football score. Okay, so I think I'd like to just do another round with our panel. Going back to Professor Stefan, you welcomed the setting up of the Westminster Investment Service. I think it'd be really useful just to hear what, in practical terms, the investment service can do to improve that investment ecosystem.
So thank you very much, and I'm keen to hear the football scores. You might be surprised. So I won't mention the two words though. So I think it's kind of the role of orchestrating the ecosystem almost, and being sure to be looped into many different partnerships. That's really the core of what I see the investment service to do. And to keep that up over time, because new partners will be emerging, new opportunities will be emerging, so kind of a continuous orchestration and alignment, if you want, and having this one-stop shop front towards the businesses. I think that will be a tremendous achievement if that can be achieved. And I think the other elements I would like to see, apparently I was too positive earlier, just to keep a little bit
Never be too positive.
A little bit of an eye also on diversity. I think it's great that we talk about high growth businesses, but we also need to understand that high growth is nothing continuous. So most companies have a growth spur, and then for some time nothing, and then there's another growth spur. And where do they come from? So most start out as small businesses, as maybe even self-employed. So keep an eye also on diversity. I know that's not too much with the inward investment, but this is kind of also part of the cultural diversity, is also to have this diversity of businesses as a backbone to the economy. And then, of course, diversity also in terms of who is leading the businesses, because I think there we still have some way to go. We know that women are underrepresented, and essentially the Rose Review told us just how much money there would be in closing that gap, and then we have an ethnicity gap as well. So I think that's worth keeping an eye on. And then going forward, Carolyn already mentioned some of the COVID kind of themes, post-COVID recovery, reimagining the economy themes, and I just want to kind of reiterate them to make sure that we're hearing them, because I think they are very important. So there is the theme around diversity inclusion that I already talked about. There is the theme about local versus global, but also in a sense, yes, there's been a disruption of global supply chains, and we've refocused on kind of maybe local, more resilient supply chains. But local is even more broadly understood. It also has to do with people recognizing that they are locally rooted and that actually there's more appreciation of this, and kind of building local communities becomes more important again. And even if you are a global nomad, so to speak, you want to be anchored in a local community, and people appreciate that post-COVID, post-Brexit. It is something that the Council is actually already doing and keeping an eye on. So I think that's kind of part of the intangible cultural fabric that will also be important to maintain. And the last thing is just sustainability is here to stay, and it's a huge opportunity, and I'm sure the Council is going to leverage that more going forward.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Henry, we know the current challenges. One of them begins with B, the other one begins with C. But what are the future challenges, and also what are the future opportunities that we should be looking at in terms of getting high growth sectors to grow even larger in Westminster?
Thanks. Yes, so I guess with high growth companies, there are two main pain points, and it's access to finance and access to talent. Even if you've got the best idea, if you can't get either of those things, your idea is going nowhere. And the talent piece is harder to speak to, particularly at the moment, because of things that I can't mention. But in terms of the access to finance one, which is also something we can track really quantitatively, there is a bit of a challenge I can almost set for Westminster. So of these high growth companies, the UK average for the ones raising finance in 2020, now admittedly that's with all that happened in 2020, the UK average was just shy of 2.4 million. The London average was just shy of 3 million, but the Westminster average was actually the lowest of those at 2.38 million, so just below the London average, but pretty much the same as the London average. And in a potentially ever more competitive landscape for the access to talent piece, those companies are going to need to raise even more to be able to hire the right amount of people and the right people within London. So I think that's an auspicious time to be starting this kind of service to try and help more of that money flow towards London. I think there is, in some quarters, a sense of a sort of job done, fait accompli of the investment scene for London high growth companies. Yes, they do get a lot, but it's clear that there's still more to be done, and it's especially at the early stage. We're seeing some quite strong warning signs that for companies raising for the first time, it's actually got harder than ever. I mean, it's a risky asset class, these high growth companies, the riskiest bit already. They are struggling at the moment. And then I think to add a potential threat, again, which I think this service can help to address, there's something around the value and price proposition of these companies as investments. Like, investors want a return on their money. We are seeing year on year more money from abroad than ever before flow into these kinds of companies. So it's a specific sort of subset of FDI. And when we speak to them about why they're investing in high growth companies, it's because they represent really good value. So US and Chinese investors in particular are interested in UK tech companies by and large, because they are cheaper than investing in similar levels of technology in their home geographies. And interestingly, I've started to notice entrepreneurs in the regions articulate some of that sort of language to investors. So they're saying, if you're going to invest £1 million in London, it gets you this. If you invest £1 million in the Northeast, it gets you this. And so there is that price competitiveness is going to become even more of a pressure. So although we've been able to undercut the rest of the world, the regions might start to undercut London. Undercut is probably too competitive a terminology there. Obviously, it's not a zero-sum game. Everyone can win. But I think articulating the value proposition of London in those terms of what your return on investment will be for these kinds of companies will be a strong opportunity.
Thank you, Henry. Courtney, the Westminster Investment Service, and actually everything that Westminster does, is about building on partnerships. We partner with London and Partners. We partner with our business improvement districts that are here today. We work with our landowners. But what do you think in addition to that, are some of our top competitive assets? And how can we build on these in order to get not only our messaging out, but making sure that Westminster is truly welcoming to new investors?
Well, I think the partnership is important, and having the existing ecosystem is really strong, as mentioned, and it needs to be joined up, and that also helps provide a united face to the investor community, but also helps things in practical terms internally. So I think I think the existing ecosystem and the strong and diverse mix of organically grown and developed companies as well as international companies is a major strength and not something that every place has. So the more that those pieces can be tied together is really compelling. I think in terms of presenting a message, the recognition that Alan spoke about is really important, because it's just a hurdle that doesn't have to be crossed, and that may seem normal here, but it's actually a luxury that a lot of locations don't have. And the regulatory environment, this is a major strength. It's not so sexy to talk about as other things, but the regulatory environment in the UK and in London for international business is among the best in the world. And also, I think just some of its good fortune at this moment in time, but having the strengths in high growth sectors, those that are leading the recovery, is going to help a lot. And promoting the innovation credentials of Westminster, I think, is really important. The digital infrastructure that I believe it was the Lord Mayor who mentioned the connectivity. One of the changes we've seen in FDI is that ICT infrastructure has come to the fore because of remote working and the importance of technology and the reliance on it. Digital infrastructure is top-level digital infrastructure is top of the list for investors these days, so that's really important. The extent to which that can be maintained and always improved is really important. And if I were promoting Westminster to the world, I would highlight the kind of beautiful dualities of it, the heritage matched with innovation and new technologies, the culture mixed with the business, as Alan also alluded to, and the quality mixed with quantity. So the sheer scale of things here, but still high value and high quality. So that's my free marketing inward investment advice for you.
Thank you very much. We'll take that. Charles, we're really pleased that the Edwardian Group is going to be an ambassador for the Westminster Investment Service. How do you think new and existing businesses can work together to ensure that the West End plays to its strength? And how do we market the West End as we move towards recovery?
Yeah, I think like any good partnership or concierge service, the key is to be a one-stop shop. You know, if we are representative of this organisation, that people who come to us to talk about inward investment, we take that on and we take responsibility then to make the correct introductions, forward it to the right people, and actually make things happen. So genuinely a real partnership, nothing necessarily transactional, but true concierge being one-stop shop. I think Courtney mentioned it beautifully. Here we are with 350 years of Leicester Square behind us, of arts and culture, and here we are at the centre of it. But we don't talk about that enough necessarily as a Westminster asset, and it really is extraordinary to think that we're in our 350th year, still at the centre of arts and culture, and still innovative, still at the very edge of design and innovation and the arts. And that's something that we need to be embracing more and make more of around the world. And of course, being frictionless. You know, a frictionless way of doing business to anybody coming into the borough or even into London. That's important for us to take responsibility for and make happen. We've embraced, through the last 2 years, we've embraced wholeheartedly a digital way of doing business to make it easy for our customers to do business with us. And that's critical, I think, moving forward in our industry and in other sectors.
Great. Thank you very much, Charles. I'm going to now turn to Alan, and then I'll be taking questions. So please, if you haven't already got your questions in, then do start asking questions of the panel. But Alan, you obviously represent London on the global stage. How can we work more closely with you and London and partners to ensure that the new service positions Westminster for new businesses, for new international startups in the city or investment in the city?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And first of all, I think we already are. because you can put all of the processes in place you want, but actually people need to work together, and we're already seeing that in this really great way. So the council, the bids, landlords, academics coming together to think about how to do this. So I think we're starting from a really positive position of real shared intent. I really like this point about to be an effective concierge, you need to give people confidence that you can be a one-stop shop. What we do at LNP and what the investment service does is to offer clarity that if we don't know the answer, we'll get it for you. That's sort of fundamentally it, right? And therefore we de-risk an investment. Now, if you're Google or you're Microsoft, whoever, and you want to invest in London, you've got strategy teams. You've got an investment bank supporting you who will de-risk everything. They will answer any question. They will find you an office space. They will tell you where your customers are. They'll tell you what the interest rate risk is, or what have you. If you're a high growth company, you likely don't have access to that quality of support. So what we need to do is to help people solve some of those information gaps. So I'll give you a practical example of a way that LNP and the bids and Westminster are working together very practically, which is, of course, the Future Occupiers project to use our networks as an organisation with offices around the world, and Westminster and the bids and the landlord's knowledge of the local market, to try and find the next generation of tenants for shops and other sorts of venues in the West End. And the key to that, to my mind, is matching local market knowledge in China and India, in North America, in Europe and elsewhere, with local knowledge in Westminster, so that we can find tenants that are able to help us not go back to our old model and our old mix, but look forward to something new. In Japan, if they break a vase, they stick it back together using golden glue. And the idea is you can see the break. And I think there's something about having an event like the last year, that it's an opportunity to find cultural renewal, business renewal, urban space renewal, which is actually thrilling rather than just necessary. So if by working together, London and Partners, the investment service, the bids, landlords, we can find the next generation of high growth businesses, but also cultural businesses, retail businesses, who are able to shape something more future looking, more global, then I think together we'll have done something really quite important.
Thank you, Alan. I'm now going to turn to questions. If you're online, do please put your questions in the chat, but I'm going to start off with the people in the room. After all, they have stumped up the tube fare. Do I have any questions for the panel in the room? So if you can please introduce yourself and which organisation you're from, and if you have a specific panellist that you would like to interrogate. As our participants here are not mic'd, I will be repeating the question so that it can be audible on the live stream. I see Ros with her hand up.
Thank you. That was really excellent, just to listen to each of your thoughts. Really insightful. I just want to come back on a point that perhaps Alan made, that culture drives investment, but it's people and diversity that drives culture. And so my question is, how might we continue to retain and grow that talent base, especially in the cultural and hospitality sectors?
Okay, so Ros's question is, how do we nurture that cultural talent? That sounds to me like a question for a professor of entrepreneurship to me. So Uta, what do you think about that? How do we ensure that we have the skills and talent for the West End?
I think it's a very good question, and it comes always down to talent, right? To human capital, to people. And I think, partly universities, if I look at my classroom, it's international, it's the top students from those countries. There is lots of global talent to be had, and they're very keen to stay. And so one of the things that, as a practical solution, there's something called the entrepreneurship visa, which also helps, to create small startups and maybe larger startups over time. So, and we're working together with the students to certify them the King's Entrepreneurship Institute. So that would be one route. But yeah, join us in universities. There is so much talent, and whilst we're doing a lot, I think we could still be doing more together to kind of bridge that gap more.
Do any of the other panel members want to come in on culture in particular? Alan?
Yeah, if I can. I think there's something about understanding the life cycle of a person, right? So the way that we tend to think about this is, imagine a young Chinese family come to London, and they stay at the Londoner, and they do the art trail which takes you from here up Piccadilly, and they go and have xiaolongbao in Chinatown, and they have a great time. And their oldest daughter says, "Mum, Dad, I want to come and study here. I want to come and do my master's in London." So 3 years later she does. She comes back, does her master's, goes back to Shenzhen. She sets up a fintech. We know that she is statistically many, many times more likely, if she internationalizes that fintech, to bring it to London because she was here as a student. We know she's more likely to come here as a student if she came here as a tourist. So if we want to continue to be net importers of not just talent but difference, the key is to understand the way that everything we offer as a city drives investment, but the start of that pipeline absolutely is being a great cultural destination for a leisure visit.
Okay, fantastic. Do we have any more questions here in the room? If not, do we have any online questions? Thank you very much. Okay. So I don't know who the question is from, but if we can, it's for Courtney. So given the changes in foreign direct investment flows, is there likely to be more competition within the UK for attracting UK-wide businesses? And are there opportunities to collaborate with other cities in the UK and overseas in creating market opportunities? I know that Ros is very keen to support businesses coming from Scotland.
Sure. Well, I'd say yes to both of those questions. There likely will be more competition. Some of what I talked about at the start, there are opportunities for locations that are smaller locations. And the UK does have a problem. I mean, I know we talk about leveling up all the time, and it's almost an overdone catchphrase now, but it is a strategic priority of the government. And the UK economy would be better off and healthier in the end if things weren't all so consolidated. And FDI is very, very, very top heavy in London, so it's no bad thing for London. And it's partly because London is a top level global FDI capital, but we do need to disperse it more to other parts of the country, and that is very clear. But how do you incentivize that? You can't just tell companies they need to do that. And I think that needs to happen. It probably will happen because there are opportunities that other cities in the UK can also capitalize on due to some of the changes brought on by the pandemic. But I also think that shouldn't be thought of as a zero-sum game, and there are complementary ways that I mean, if you just think about a company where there is obviously scope to have perhaps a headquarter in London or somewhere else, to have an R&D center here, to have sales office, to have a technical development center here, to even have production and logistics and warehousing, and that can all technically be done in the UK in the places where it makes the most sense. So I personally would like to see more of this. Let's have more competition amongst UK cities, but also think of ways that everyone can benefit from it.
Thank you. Does anybody else from the panel want to come in on that? How do we get businesses that are established in other UK cities to come down to London? We now have the opportunity of a retail environment where there are lots of vacancies, costs are lower. How do we get Betty's of Harrogate to open a shop on Oxford Road, on Oxford Street, for example?
Should I have a crack at that?
Have a crack at that, yeah. I want my fat rascals.
Well, we all want our fat rascals. is the only word, fat rascal, that regardless of where you are in the country, you say rascal. So I think it's about understanding that London's a gateway. That's the thing. So we're a gateway into the UK and perhaps Europe from elsewhere in the world. We can also be a gateway to the rest of the world from within the UK. We are expensive, but unless every economist is wrong, that's just the price of future profits. So we shouldn't be bad value unless the market isn't working. If we can say, I think if we want to take a Betty's or Booths or whoever into London, a way to do that is to say that we can be a place which is a launchpad to future global expansion, and we should be able to do that effectively. I also do want to comment very quickly on the point about kind of levelling up and the FDI agenda, because to my mind it's a bad idea to compete. It's a good idea to have partnership for this reason you say about, look, you can bring your headquarters to London, your distribution centre in Stoke, and your R&D function in Manchester. That's a model that strikes me as being really works. And actually, we've just done a virtual trade mission to America in partnership with our equivalent organisation, Midas, in Manchester. And the intention is to say, look, there's certain types of business best done in London, there's certain types of business frankly more cheaply done in Manchester. Let's work together to put it together. And if we can do that, we'll be successful. If we go and say, look, you're currently looking at London, Paris and Berlin, but here's Runcorn, that's not going to work. It strikes me.
Okay, thank you, Alan. I've got a question here for Henry. You talked about the high growth sector here in Westminster. Is that similar to the rest of London, or is the ecosystem here in Westminster different from other parts of the capital?
So I guess as a starting point, it's the biggest of the sort of sub ecosystems in London by quite a significant way. It is followed by the city, and I think that's no coincidence. It's to do with the brand that both those cities have. Then it's Camden, Islington, and Hackney in that order for their share of the UK's high growth population. In terms of the sort of business traits, if you like, it's kind of a microcosm for the UK. We see very little variation. It's got the same as the UK's overall share of spin-outs. So that number I showed you of spin-outs is actually about the same as the UK's share of spin-outs in the high growth population at all. It's got about the same share of B2B businesses versus B2C, which is about 60% to 40%. Ever so slightly more have raised equity compared with the rest of the UK, but that's 70% versus 67%. So it's very similar to the rest of London and to the UK as a whole. The difference we start to see is some of those sectors that I mentioned in my presentation. I guess in London it's such a broad base of businesses that you're seeing good representation across all of those sectors, and it dominates the UK to an extent that because London as a whole is an AI and fintech powerhouse, the UK has become a fintech and AI powerhouse. So although that's a bit of a non-answer to say it's broadly the same, I think that's actually quite natural and what you'd expect, and shows it's functioning quite well.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got a question for Charles here, which is how has the Londoner Hotel collaborated with local businesses, and how did this help with the design and the development of the hotel?
That sounds like a question from one of my colleagues, perhaps.
I haven't got the name here, but...
It's a great question, and it allows me to talk about how we've taken what is great about Westminster, in particular the West End, and brought everything that's great about arts and culture within the building under one roof. The narrative which we proudly talk about is the Londoner offers something for every Londoner and non-Londoner. In terms of arts and culture, the whole building has been designed to reflect what is great and good about this part of London and London generally. We've invested significantly in our own private collection of art, which is already capturing the imagination of many people and causing great great excitement, we made a commitment to Westminster Council to provide public art, and at great expense. The blue you see on the outside of the building is actually an art piece in its own right. It was designed by the great ceramicist Ian Munro, and every single terracotta tile with blue glaze was handmade to reflect the lights of Leicester Square and during the night, and the sun during the day. And it was inspired by a beautiful painting by Monet of Leicester Square. So we've taken everything that is culturally wonderful and dynamic about this part of London and brought it into the building. More importantly, I think, to your question about partnerships and how we made that work, we, over the last 10 years, more than 10 years, last 20 years, Edwardian has invested significantly into the arts and have become significant working partners with just about every great cultural institution in London, whether that be the National Gallery, which is literally 30 metres away from our front door, the National Portrait Gallery, the Royal Academy, the Serpentine Gallery, the Maddox Gallery, and the list goes on of institutions that we partner with. And we mean partner, we don't just mean we can get the occasional few free tickets because we do a few rooms. It means we work together as business partners to generate business for each other. And it's back to the point about concierge. We believe that we are a concierge service for our business and for the community. And this just all feeds into the economic ecosystem of the borough. And I would encourage others to operate in a similar way because it pays off.
Thank you very much, Charles. And while we're here in Leicester Square, and you mentioned public art, I should do a little plug for the new Game of Thrones throne that has just been installed in Leicester Square. So Game of Thrones fans can come and sit in that, or at least come and look at it in this weather. So I've got a question now for Professor Stefan. How can we support companies in the life sciences sector that have progressed from initial investment in technology and R&D to actual manufacture?
That's a good question.
Probably the subject of a 90-minute lecture.
I'm not quite sure I'm the best expert on this, but I think the tricky bit is, if my understanding of the question is correct, is obviously the time lags you have and the amount of patient capital you need before you can actually go and manufacture. So there's a lot of upfront investment and lots of upfront investment that's typically needed, and a lot of trust in the technology that's being developed. So beyond that, I think that's actually where we see historically, in terms of where it's been very successful, that actually governments have typically co-invested. And I think there's important models, and I think we can be maybe a bit more ambitious even thinking forward, kind of that government also takes options and gets paid back, for instance. I think it's about risk sharing when you have these long-term time horizons, because that's really difficult to reconcile with typical investor time horizons.
Okay, thank you. So I've got a question here that's been submitted by Charles Begley, who's the Executive Director of the Westminster Property Association. And obviously the Westminster Property Association is working very closely with us as a council, with business improvement districts, landowners and London and partners on helping businesses find space in the borough. So Charles asks, the area is undergoing significant change as it adapts to new ways of working and leisure, many of which have the potential to leave long-lasting positive impacts in terms of improved public realm and open spaces, lower air pollution, and an alfresco continental dining culture. Do you sense that residents, businesses, and visitor aspirations are starting to align more closely to the type of city people want to see emerging from the pandemic? Maybe, Alan, you could start off and see if you can answer that one for me.
That feels like I'm going to get into trouble very quickly answering that. I think yes, there are some trends which, to me, I think it's important to say we don't know if they're permanent or temporary. So the home working thing, there's really interesting, the research on this has started to roll in, hasn't it? And we know that home working has advantages, but those advantages do not include efficiency. And generally speaking, business owners tend to want efficiency. So there are some of these trends which I don't think we know whether or not they survive a return to the ability to go into the office if you want to. There are some things which I think probably will. Managing conflicting stakeholder interests in something like outdoor dining versus living in that region is always going to be a challenge. But I think perhaps the question is less about, are those interests aligning? I hope that they are. And more, can we help to manage that alignment? So can we work together as different stakeholder groups to build a Westminster in this instance that we want? It is worth saying though that sometimes those alignments require choices between competing interests. So I'll give you a practical example. Tourism creates carbon. If you want somebody to fly over from China, it creates carbon. Having more tourists, therefore, is not the same thing as being sustainable. The question, therefore, is how can you make it more sustainable given the reality of having tourists? If you want to have outdoor dining, people who live nearby will be impacted by that. So being frank about where there are trade-offs really matters, but the way that you do that, I think, therefore, which has to be about partnership, becomes more important.
So maybe, Charles, you could come in on that. You obviously deal with thousands of visitors every year. Do you still see that natural friction between business and resident, visitor and resident, visitor and business? Or do you think that the pandemic is realigning that triangle?
I think it's an understandable friction, and the pandemic certainly has helped. People are a little bit more forgiving about businesses trying to re-establish themselves. But I think our strategic approach to our neighbours and residents has just been to reach out and engage and inform them as to what we have planned. And we've had the most fantastic response. We are going to launch a roof terrace on our 8th floor. We are going to launch a terrace, which is a wraparound from Wickham Street and Panton Street. And we've invited them all to join us, all of our neighbours. So it's just about total engagement. And we've also laid out our green strategy, which most people who are serious about the environment are serious about understanding what any new business is up to in terms of its green credentials. And we've laid this out for people and explained why we're doing it and how we're doing it. And it's been nothing but encouraged and embraced. So I think really just generally reaching out and being transparent.
I think, having chaired licensing committees for many hours of my life, I can certainly attest to the fact of talking to your neighbours in advance and perhaps inviting them round for a drink is a good way of getting them on side.
Absolutely.
I've got another question from the chat for anyone on the panel. It says, we see lots of moves within central London. Talent isn't the key factor. So is it working environment? And in particular, is it rent? I think, Uta, you referenced that as one of the challenges for Westminster. Would you like to start off by taking that one?
Well, yeah, I think it is a challenge. It is kind of, in the sense, the crisis is an opportunity because rents have come down. And I think it's also for the rent, so in terms of business property, but also if you think that there's actually a whole segment of hidden entrepreneurs who are working from home, and who would like to be in, a culturally rich city centre, who we don't see. But if rents come down, then you might also get more of those. And I think there's actually more than we think, especially in central London.
Courtney, what do you think about that one? Do you think rents are a barrier to investment in a place like Westminster or in London in general?
It can be. I mean, if you're thinking about residential rents, it's clearly a problem for talent, especially young talent. That said, you clearly don't need to live in Westminster to work in Westminster,
although we would prefer it if you did.
Ideally, but you don't have to. Rent is a clear issue, but commercial rents are a challenge, obviously, even though they've come down. And there's a slight problem that London has compared to other places. For example, in Italy, where I also kind of live, it's very often that, if you have a bar, restaurant or something, they may just own that building, and therefore they were able to ride out this crisis quite well. Whereas in London, you obviously had, landlords, some good, some bad, but wanting their rent, and that's why we saw so many more closures in London. So I'd have to, there's not any easy solution to the rent question, but my answer would just be that it matters an awful lot, and it has to be managed as a potential downside.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got a question for Alan here. I know we have a number of overseas colleagues with us online from London and Partners and the Department for International Trade. I hope the international colleagues are not in Shenzhen, otherwise it's 1 a.m. How can our overseas partners tap into the Westminster Investment Service and share perceptions of Westminster as a business location and help us support setting up new businesses here?
Yeah, well, if they want to, perhaps as a practical thing, contact me or you, I'm sure we'd be happy to help. I think more broadly, we have materials, collateral to help to explain, but we'd be happy to put the team in front of anybody who's looking at investing in London. We are doing, if they were, for instance, in Asia, we are doing trade missions aimed at the West End, virtual trade missions in July, which we'd be happy to have people to. We'll be doing those virtual trade missions around the world as well. But I think in general, if you come to the service, to the Westminster Investment Service, or you come to London and Partners, we will work to make sure that you have access to the best information you can possibly have so that you can de-risk your investment into this region.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. That's the last question. I'd like us to give the panel a round of applause for all their answers this afternoon. So now comes my Eurovision moment where I turn to Debbie Jackson, who's our Executive Director of Growth Planning and Housing at Westminster City Council. There she is. The line to Skopje has worked, and we can now get the points from the North Macedonian jury. Or if you prefer, Debbie, you can give the closing remarks to this session.
Okay, thank you, Matthew, and thanks, and good afternoon, everybody. And I am very aware I am between you and the second half of the match, so I will keep this fairly short. Fantastic event, and really enjoyed hearing all the contributions from the panel, and beautifully emceed Matthew. And for the record, both I and my mother used to work for Betty's, so if you want the inside track, more than happy to have that chat. My overall impression from this afternoon is one of realistic optimism, if I can put it that way. There's no doubt that times have been tough, but I feel like we've heard different perspectives from the panel on the reasons why the partnership that we've heard about this afternoon through the investment service, the partnership between the council and our partners such as the BIDs and London and Partners, but also really interested to hear about some of the partnerships between businesses as well, and how that can support and help each other to drive the economy in Westminster. In terms of our aims and motivations for setting up the investment service, what we've heard about this evening is we very much have an ambition to be seen as a business-friendly council. We wholly recognise the value that the economy brings, and at the end of the discussion there, we talked about the relationship between the residents and the businesses. And of course, Westminster is such a great place to do business because it is residential as well. And it contributes to what we've heard so much about this evening, which is about the sort of character and diversity of Westminster. And again, looping back to how important that is to investment in the borough as well. I think one of the things that we aim to achieve through the investment service is to provide support to businesses, but support that is built on engagement with our businesses and understanding of Westminster's businesses. We've heard about various sectors this evening, and we're really keen to improve all the time our understanding of those sectors. Really great contributions from the panels. I've scribbled down so many things and I won't go through all of them. There's an overall point that I think everybody's violently agreeing on in terms of the sort of unique characteristics of Westminster, and a lot of that is built upon the sort of storytelling and history of the place. But also we talked a little bit about what I'm going to call values-based investment. I was really pleased to hear points come out around sustainability, diversity, local community. I think it was Alan that used the phrase that we're net importers of difference. And that's one of the reasons I choose to make London my home, and I think it's one of the reasons that people choose to invest in, visit, enjoy, dance, drink, do all the things they do in Westminster. And so to summarise then, just coming back to that point that I think I'm pleased to hear the investment service so warmly welcomed this evening as part of our broader ecosystem of partnerships in terms of our ambitions to continue to promote and grow the economy of the West End and support our transition as we move on to a post-pandemic context, which I think everybody understands is not going to be just returning to where we were before. So thank you. I'm living the hybrid dream. I'm sorry I couldn't be there this evening, but I really enjoyed the discussion. And thank you also, I should say, to the team who've put this together and got us this far. We're really looking forward to cracking on. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Debbie. And thank you, everybody who has joined us in the room today or online. Thank you on behalf of Westminster City Council and the Westminster Investment Service, as well as our panel here today. We look forward to continuing to cooperate with you through the Westminster Investment Service to ensure that we have more businesses coming into our city and creating new and better paying jobs for our residents. Thank you very much.